Well, good evening and welcome to East Lake Baptist Church. It's good to see everybody that's made it out through the fog to come tonight and worship the Lord. Let's stand together and turn in our hymnals or look up at the screen, page 202. All hail the power of Jesus' name. Greet those around you on the third. Across the page or the next slide on the screen. His name is wonderful. If you turn over a couple pages, page 206, Blessed be the name. Our worship and song, turn to page 210 as we sing, My Jesus, I Love Thee. My Jesus, I love Thee, I know Thou art mine, for Thee all the follies of sin I resign. My precious Redeemer, my Savior art Thou. If ever I love Thee, my Jesus, 'tis now. I love Thee because Thou hast first loved me, and purchased my pardon on Calvary's tree. I love Thee for wearing the storms on Thy brow. If ever I love Thee, my Jesus, 'tis now. In mansions of glory and endless delight, I'll ever adore Thee in heaven's light. Singing Thy praises before Thee I'll bow. If ever I love Thee, my Jesus, 'tis now. Let's go, Lord, in prayer. I'm asking Brother Bill Gibbs would lead us as we pray. Brother Bill?
All right. Thank you, Brother Bill. You can be seated. Good to see you guys out tonight. We're in here, and all the other people are running around with the kids in the back. But if you ever feel led to work in Awana, great ministry opportunity for you to do that, and we'll excuse you from here for that. But good to see you tonight. Let's open our Bible to the book of Revelation chapter 2 tonight. Revelation chapter 2. I hope you were able to be with us this morning because it will really help to understand what we're going to talk about tonight, because this passage talks about Balaam, and many of you maybe heard about Balaam, in your Sunday school classes and things, but I talked about it this morning. Help us understand better what Balaam's problem was. So we'll talk about this a little bit tonight, but if you missed this morning, go later on. Don't do it now, but go later on, get on the internet and watch it so you can understand a little more about Balaam. I don't know about you guys, but my family, when I was growing up, had a preferred method of punishment for us children. It was cat of nine tails, scorpion. No, it was the wooden spoon. We used the wooden spoon. When I was a kid, my parents used a wooden spoon. We had different choice, but in our family, we had something a little bit different, but we believed in spanking the children, and my parents, I got that from them. They believed in spanking us, and one of the most dreaded sounds in my house as a child was the silverware drawer. Open that silverware drawer, and the force with which it was opened told a lot about how bad we had been. Slam! And, knives flew around the kitchen. It was open. Well, not quite that bad. Not for me anyway. Now, one of my sisters and my brother, that's a little different story. But my parents had no problem with a wooden spoon. And where we're talking, at night, how kids do, you're supposed to be sleeping and you're talking. And all they had to do was open the silverware drawer. It was like slowing down when you're driving the car. I grew up in the back of one of these station wagons that was like 50 yards long. You have one of those things, and you could fit like 800 kids in the back. I grew up one of those. All Mom had to do was let up on the gas when we weren't behaving, and she'd pull over and give it to us. Okay, she'd let up on the gas, and man, we were all little angels. But that silverware drawer, you open that drawer up a little bit, and you hear it, and we're all quiet because the silverware drawer housed the wooden saber. Okay, in the silverware drawer was the weapon. All they had to do was rattle that drawer, and we knew Mom and Dad meant business. So we had a paddle. We used a couple different things that we believe in it because we saw the difference that it made in the kids. And so all we had to do for a while was take out our paddle and set it on the counter. We used to do that. So we just set it on the counter. The kids are all, misbehaving, or just, sometimes they're almost just on a line. They're not quite there, but any second now they're going to go over that line. We would just take out the paddle and set it on the counter in the holy hush. It worked amazing wonders, because as soon as they saw the weapon, well, maybe we shouldn't say weapon. As soon as they saw the instrument of discipline, training, they knew they had to behave or they might experience some pain. Okay? Whenever the weapon shows up, whenever something like that shows up, you know that somebody means business. Sometimes we read about, people that have some issues, whether it's anger or whatever, and they pull out a gun. We just, last Sunday night, just about, 4 or 5 miles from here at Walmart, you know that there was a shooting there with a couple of people, I understand, involved in some gang or something. But, as soon as that weapon comes out, you know that somebody means business, right? Well, tonight as we look at the Revelation here, Jesus is telling himself about who he is to the churches. Tonight, the church at Pergamos, he mentions a weapon that he has. I'm going to show you again the picture here that we've got of Jesus. This is, of course, an artist rendering, but Jesus came and he's telling him, showing who he is to these churches, and he describes, the candlesticks, the lampstands there. They're indicative of these churches to which he's writing. But one of the things you can't really see in the picture there, but he describes himself as having a double-edged sword coming out of his mouth. Well, we take, of course, that to mean his power is in his word. His word has all the power he'd have. But when he comes to the church of Pergamos, he says, I am the one who has the sword. And so what they need to understand is that he's the one who has the power that he has the authority. He has the power to inflict punishment on them because there's something in Pergamos that is not right, and they need to deal with it. It's almost like God is rattling the cosmic silverware drawer, or whatever it was in your house. The belts flying through the bell hoop, whap, 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 and they know the belt's coming out. Whatever it was in your family, right? The punishment is coming, and you better behave. You better be towing the line, okay? That's what Jesus is telling them as we get to the church of Pergamos. You can talk about it, you can have disagreement. When the weapon comes out, it is time to straighten up. And so before we read this, I'm going to give you the introduction. Remember, every time Jesus comes to one of these churches, he introduces himself, and he gives a condemnation. Most of the time, once or twice he doesn't. But usually the pattern is he gives a condemnation. There's something you're doing wrong. And a commendation, there's something you're doing right. And he gives a promise. And he gives them a command, how you need to fix things. Well, tonight, he starts off with the introduction, and every introduction has something to do with how he's shown himself in this vision to John. So the first thing he wants to tell him is that, hey, before I tell you what I'm going to tell you, you need to understand that I hold the sword. And when I'm brandishing my weapon, you had better be paying attention. Because if things don't get fixed in your church, I'm going to come and I'm going to fix it myself. And let me tell you, you're better you fix it than God have to come and fix it. So we ought to perk up our ears a little bit and say, what was the problem in Pergamos where God says, you understand I've got the sword, right? We used to, and sometime when we're driving down the road, when the kids were younger, and Austin is 18 now, so it's been 6 days since he had his last paddling? No, not really. He's been here. But we don't have to do it so much anymore, which is really nice. But when they were all a lot littler, you gotta do a lot more of the training, the discipline, right? And there were sometimes we'd be driving down the road. You figure out how to parent after you've been doing it for a while, right? You wouldn't even have to pull out the paddle. This is all we'd have to do. We got the paddle over there? Yep. Quiet. It works so well because the kids know, the paddle is in the car. And believe me, we stopped a few times, and we took care of the issues. But let me tell you this in case you don't believe in spanking kids. It absolutely works, and we never abused our children. And it's taught them you obey. Never once do we have to, let me rephrase it. Yeah, sometimes you have to tell them twice. But our kids knew they had to obey. When we tell them something, they knew how to do it, right? Because that was the same way that I was with my parents. Because they trained us the right way. So I'm not an abuser, not mean, but I taught my children, and they're better today for it, and yours probably are too, because many of you did the same way that we did, right? You say, I'm going to teach my children. But Jesus comes and he said, look, I'm holding the sword, so you had better pay attention. What is it he's going to tell them? Look in Revelation chapter 2 and verse 12. And to the angel or the messenger, the pastor of the church in Pergamos, and now whatever Bible version you're reading, it might say Pergamos, it might say Pergamon, Pergamum, whatever. When you translate between languages, it comes across differently. The New King James says Pergamos, so that's what I'll call it tonight. To the angel of the church in Pergamos, write, these things says he who has the sharp two-edged sword. Right off the bat, tell them that I got the weapon. Tell them that I'm holding the sword. And so the people in Pergamos, when they read us, they should stop and say, whoa, we better pay attention to this, right? Because he's got the sword. He's serious. Sounds like a threat here. I think he means business. So what happened? What happened is there's something going on in Pergamos that the people need to fix. And this is what it is. They are compromising with sin. They are allowing sin and false teaching in the midst of their church, and God says, you need to stop that because I'm holding the sword, and I'm not going to allow this to go on. And that's where we're going to see how Balaam comes into this. If you remember from this morning, Balaam compromised. Balaam wanted something for himself, so he tried to find a way to do what was wrong. He compromised. He sold out. Hey, for money, I'm going to do something wrong. And so what God says to the church in Pergamos is, you're allowing, for whatever reason, whatever benefit you're getting from this, you're allowing wrong things to happen in your church. And you need to stop. You need to do something about these people here. And so they've got this culture of compromise there in the church. So he says, look, I'm the one who holds a sword, and I'm going to do something about this. But God's not just coming and being mean here, okay? Before he actually gets to the problem, he gives them a commendation, a good thing. It's like your boss calls you in and sits you down, and your boss says, "You've been doing a real good job. So glad to have you here in our company. You're on time. You stay late when I need you. You know, your production numbers are up," or whatever it is you have. And you're sitting there the whole time saying, "The butt's coming," right? But what are you going to tell me? Because, he's buttering me up or she's buttering me up because they're going to tell me something I'm doing wrong, right? But that's what a wise person will do. There's all this stuff I appreciate about you, but there is an issue we need to work on, okay? And that's what Jesus says. I'm going to tell you, Pergamos people, that there's something you got to work on, but it's not like I hate you. It's not like everything's bad. First, I'm going to tell you how good you are in some areas, and then I'm going to tell you about the areas you need to fix, okay? So that's what he's doing here. So that's where we start in verse 13. He says, "I know your works." Remember, Jesus already told them, "I walk among the lampstands." Those lampstands they represent the different churches that he's writing to here. He says, "I walk among the lampstands. I know what's going on. I know your works, where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. And you hold fast to my name, and did not deny my name, even in the days in which Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was killed among you, where Satan dwells." Now, this is worth looking at. And here's what he's telling. Here's the commendation, okay? Understand the difference between commendation and condemnation. A commendation is saying, "Attaboy, good job." Condemnation is saying, "Bad." This is the good part. Commendation. Hey, guys, you know what? As a church, you're being faithful. Because Pergamos was an area, they were experiencing a lot of paganism, a lot of problems. And he points out, Jesus says, "Look, guys, I know what's going on in your church. I know how hard it is. I know how faithful you've been. I know your works and where you dwell, where Satan's throne is." What does he mean by that? Twice in that verse. You dwell where Satan's throne is, and he says at the end of the verse, where Satan dwells. What are we talking about here? There's something about Pergamos where Jesus says that is where Satan dwells. So I think to help us understand this church in Pergamos a little bit, we need to try to figure this out. What is this place where Satan dwells? The problem is we don't know for sure. But we have some ideas, okay? It might be one of these ideas I'll give you. It might be all of them together. But let me explain a little bit about Pergamos and what was going on there. One of the things that they had there in Pergamos was they had worship of the healing god Asclepius. He was a healing god, he or she, I'm not sure, was a healing god. And they had the Asclepian, which was a healing center in Pergamos. I think I have a picture of some ruins there. These people would go to this place, and it was almost like a hospital. But it was for physical ailments and psychological ailments. And the people would go to the Asclepian, and they would spend a night there, and they would talk to priests/doctors. And they would spend the night, and they would get up in the next day, and they would tell these priest-doctors what their dreams were, and the priest-doctors would then interpret their dreams for them and try to, give them ways to heal themselves and stuff like that. So it wasn't like you're going to spend a night in a hospital. It was almost like a resort hospital or something like that, where you want to go and have your issues taken care of. And obviously, this was a whole worship to the god Asclepius here. So this was a paganistic thing here. So maybe that's where Satan dwells, because this was going on. This was a very big deal there in Pergamos, and we're going to be back to that in just a little bit. By the way, Asclepius, this god, was often represented similar to a snake on a stick, like our medical symbol. Your EMS systems will have the snake on a stick, and that's how that was a symbol for this god, because this was the healing god. And so they had this going on in Pergamos, and Jesus says, "You know what? I know how hard it is to live there in Pergamos, because that's where Satan dwells." Maybe he was talking about this. Maybe there was satanic work going on in this place. There's another option, and that is that they had a shrine to the god Demeter, the grain goddess that was there. Not only that, but they had a large altar, a huge altar to the god Zeus. Maybe you've heard of Zeus before. And this is very interesting. In the late 1800s, they actually went over there and excavated the altar of Zeus and moved it to the Pergamon Museum I think it's in Berlin, Germany. And that would be really cool to go to. Right now, it's under renovation, so you can't see it until sometime next year. But here's a picture of it before they went under renovation. That's actually the altar to the god Zeus. And they took all those rocks and brought them, put them in the museum. You can actually go and see this thing when they're done remodeling. But this is very interesting. So this was an altar there, a shrine, a temple to the god Zeus. You could, go there, you could offer your sacrifices in Pergamos, where they had this church. Now, this is very interesting because look at the design of that, all those columns and the stairs and all that. In the Zeppelin Field, if you're familiar with Zeppelin Field, the Nazi rallying grounds was designed after this. I have a picture of that right here, too. It was designed after, see the columns and everything up there? They designed it after this temple or this altar to the god Zeus. And I don't know if this is true or not, but this is interesting. Some say that Obama's, I think his first inauguration, or was it his acceptance speech? I wrote it somewhere here. His first acceptance speech, they say that it was modeled after that. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but look at the design of there. It's just interesting to follow all this stuff. Where does all it come from? Well, that altar was there in Pergamos. And so people would go and worship at this altar, and here these people were trying to live right. They're trying to do the right things, and they have all this ungodliness that's going on all around them. Besides that, in Pergamos, they also worship the emperor. So you've got all these things going on, and Jesus says, look, in all of this, you guys are living faithful. In all of this paganism and all of this worship to these false gods and trying to heal through this sorcery or whatever was going on in the Asclepian there, you guys are still trying to be faithful. And so I commend you for that. Good job to you. Before I get to the bad stuff, I just want to tell you that you guys are being faithful. I know your works and where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. And you hold fast to my name and did not deny my faith, even in the days in which Antipas was my faithful martyr who was killed among you. Apparently Antipas was a very famous person who was martyred, and the church did not let that scare them. They continued on, and they decided to do what was right. They continued on to be faithful. So there's a lot of good that was happening there in Pergamos in the church. With all this wickedness going on around them, they still stood faithful. And by the way, that should serve as somewhat of an application for us tonight. Because I don't know if any of you have noticed, but there's a lot of, what's the best way to put it? A lot of trash going on around us in the world, okay? There's a lot of wickedness going on around us in the world. A lot of ungodliness. Maybe it's not paganism in the same way that the people in Pergamos were experiencing. Well, that's not Pergamos, but the people in Pergamos were experiencing paganism. Maybe it's not like that, but there's a lot of wickedness in the world. And Jesus says, look, I know how wicked your society is. I get all that, but you know what? You're still being faithful. And so maybe that's the same thing he would tell Eastlake if he was here today. Look, I know there's a lot of wickedness around. There's just a lot of people just leaving truth. There's a lot of people that totally disregard anything God says, but you are being faithful. That's the kind of people that we should be, right? Doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. You guys are being faithful. That's the kind of message that we should want for God to give us. So here we have God walks among the lampstands, and he says, look, I see everything, I know everything, and I know that you guys are being faithful. But there's something that we got to deal with tonight. So we come to the condemnation. You've been allowing compromise in your church. You've been allowing sin. You've been compromising. You have allowed some things in your church. Among all your faithfulness, you still have allowed some things that have to go. You've allowed some sin in your midst. Look at verse 14 of Revelation chapter 2. But I have a few things against you. Oh, I knew it was coming. Because you have there those who hold the doctrine of Balaam. Not everybody, but there's some there in your church that hold the doctrine of Balaam. Remember Balaam from this morning? What did Balaam do? Balaam, for a reward, sinned. He tried, first, God would not let him curse the Israelites, so he told Balak, the king of the Moabites, or the Midianites, he told him how to destroy the people of Israel. Send your women over there, and they will fall for the women, then they will fall for your false gods. Balaam instructed them in that. Why? Because he wanted something. He sold out. He had a price, and Balak found out what it was, okay? And so here to the church in Pergamos, look, you guys have some that hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel. You have people in your church that for whatever benefit they're getting from it are helping other people to sin. And you better stop that right now, because I have the sword. Okay? That's what Jesus is saying to them here. So he says, you have these people that you're allowing to be there still, who hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit sexual immorality. You are allowing compromise. Remember from this morning, what the doctrine of Balaam is what? Selling out beliefs, selling out what's right for personal gain. For whatever reason, I'm going to sin, I'm going to allow sin because it will benefit me somehow. That's the kind of thing that's going. And what exactly was it in the church? We're not really told. But whatever it was, there was a group of people in the church that were sinning or allowing people to sin, operating in the doctrine of Balaam. Now, that doesn't mean to have a class. Everybody come to Sunday school next week, and we're going to talk about Doctrine of Balaam 101. We're going to try to follow Balaam. I don't think that's what he's talking about. He's saying they're acting like Balaam. Balaam sold out. He sinned because he wanted something. There was a benefit for him. He says, you guys got people in your church that are doing the same thing. Whatever thing. Maybe they're allowing sin. Maybe they're sweeping some sin under the rug so they can have this elevated position in the church. Because, you don't want to make somebody mad, then they might take your position away. Maybe it was that kind of thing. We're not really told. But there's sin that's being allowed there. And God says, it's got to go, okay? 3 things that Balaam taught people here that he mentioned here. He purposely caused them to stumble. He counseled Balak how to destroy the Israelites. He encouraged them to sacrifice to idols and to commit acts of immorality. Now, were those the exact things going on there in the church of Pergamos? We don't know. Maybe. But whatever it was, they had people compromising. They had people in the church that were allowing sin or that were sinning for their own personal benefit, instead of standing up and saying, this is not allowed. And let me tell you this. Anytime you stand up against something that's wrong, people are going to hate you for it. Some people, anyway. Not everybody. If there was an issue, and I do believe in church discipline, you got to be careful, you got to be wise about it, there's rules on it, but if somebody in the church is in a public sin like that, it needs to be dealt with. But anytime you do that, you mark it down, somebody will be mad at you because you don't love people. Church isn't about finding out other people's sins. It's a hospital for the broken. You got all these kind of things that people say. No, part of what you do as a church is you try to keep it pure. And we're all, all of us in here, how can it be pure, right? But you try to keep it the best you can. And a part of what we're supposed to be doing here is helping point out, hey, you know what? You got a sin, and I want to help you through it. But when there's somebody that's got a sin like that, and we just turn a blind eye to that, Jesus says, I got the sword. You want me to come and fix the problem? It's like you telling your kids, you want me to come in there? No, we'll take care of it ourselves, Dad. Right? Jesus is saying, you want me to come down there and fix this problem? Probably not. So you better fix it yourself. You're allowing sin in your church. Now, that doesn't mean we're going on a witch hunt, and we're trying to find anything anyone's done wrong and parade them up here and tell them. That's not the idea. But there's sometimes something is so egregious, especially if it deals with a leader in the church or some kind of like a sexual sin, you've got to deal with it. And people aren't going to like it, but you've got to deal with it, because we would rather us deal with it than have God come and deal with it. And so those are just things that we need to tuck away. We hope it never happens here, but it could. So we need to understand that God does not allow us. Well, wait a minute, what about our loving God? What about, the fuzzball God, as people like to think of him? And what about the God who just wants to gather us all in a big group hug? Well, that's not the God in the Bible. Even back, like we talked about this morning in the situation with Balaam there, and these men all went over there, and they got involved with the women in Moab and Midian and all that. And God came and said, you need to kill all those people. All those enemies, people who have these false gods, kill them all. I mean, that's the kind of God we're dealing with. He doesn't like sin. He's loving. Yes, he will forgive, but he's not going to tolerate sin. And that's hard for us to swallow sometime, right? But that's the God that he is. So the lesson in that is you better toe the line and you don't have to worry about that. Right? Well, I don't like to hear about that God who punishes. Well, do what's right and you don't have to worry about it. Pretty simple, I would think, right? Do what's right, and you don't have to worry about it. And if there's someone that is in a sin, and there's so many things we need to spend more time talking about that, but as long as you're not in that sin, you're doing it with the right spirit and all those things, you go to that person, you try to help them out. And by the way, you might not be the person to approach someone else about their sin. You might not be the right person for a host of reasons that we're not getting into tonight. But we can't just let things slide. It's not what God wants. And so they've got people here that are allowing the sin to go on. And Jesus says, no, you got to do something about this. So that's the condemnation here. The people are following in the doctrine of Balaam. They're compromising, allowing wrong things to be in their church. Well, what's the command? Remember, he gives a command to the churches. I'm telling you what's good about you. I'm telling you what's bad, what you need to fix. Now I'm going to tell you how to fix it. So the command, compromise must be abolished. Cut it out. Don't allow this stuff in your church. It might be compromise on doctrine. By the way, I don't think I read verse 14 there. It's not just those acting in the ways of Balaam, but look at verse 14. But I have a few things against you because, well, I just read that one. Verse 15. Thus you also have those who hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate. Now, we just would love to know what the doctrine of the Nicolaitans was, because it mentions it a couple times. We don't know for sure, but that doesn't matter. Whatever this doctrine was, God says, I hate it. It's a false teaching of some kind, and God says, I am not going to deal with that. I hate it. You put that out of your midst. I don't like it. So there's some things that God hates, and that's one of them. So he says, look, this stuff needs to be abolished. Look in verse 16. Repent, or else I will come to you quickly and will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. Now, this is important here. Jesus says, you have people in your church that are allowing this compromise, that are allowing the sin, right? Who is he rebuking in this? He's not rebuking those who are in sin and allowing the sin. Or not, he's not, let me rephrase it. He's not rebuking those who are in the sin. He's rebuking those who are not doing anything about the sin. He says, you fix this problem. If not, I'm going to come and I'm going to deal with those people in sin myself. But he's not directly talking to the ones that are in the sin. They're probably not his anyway. He's talking to the other people in the church saying, you guys fix that problem or I'm going to come and fix that problem. The rebuke is on these faithful people. So remember, you guys were faithful. You're living there where Satan dwells. You got all this stuff going on. You've been faithful. Even when people are being martyred, you're still being faithful. But you're missing something that you're not dealing with sin in your congregation. So you better deal with it, because if I have to come and deal with it, things aren't going to be pretty, and you don't want that. In essence, that's what Jesus is saying to them here. So he's rebuking the believers in the church who are doing nothing about it, and he says, repent. When God gets mad about sin and does something about it, it's not good. In the Old Testament, in the days of Balaam, when all this was going on, 24,000 people died. I don't think that means he was going to come and eliminate 24,000 people out of that church, but it's almost like he might say, guys, go back and read your Bible and see what happens when I have to deal with the problem, okay? And like Paul said about the Lord's Supper, there's some people are mistreating the whole Lord's Supper situation. Some are sick and some died. What? God killed people because they didn't do what's right? Yeah. I think we ought to stop and say, I don't know, man, am I doing what's right? I don't want to face God who's got the sword coming out of his mouth. And you might say, well, it's not me that's in sin. Well, are you allowing it? Write this down, please. God cannot tolerate sin, therefore we should not either. Now, I apologize for not, how would I word it? Not sounding like the guy on your TV. Let me put it that way, okay? The feel-good ones. Because I could just tell you, oh, God slobbers all over you. He loves you. He kisses you up and down. Oh, everything's wonderful. You're great people. But we're not. Does God love you? Yes. Does God love you more than anybody else? Yes. Did God send his own son for you? Yes. But does he tolerate your sin? No. God does not tolerate sin, and therefore we should not either. In our own life, in the lives of those around us, as long as we are the right person to deal with it. And I have to go back to that again, too. It's so easy to go around and look for everybody else's sin. Remember what Jesus talked about the mote in your eye and the beam? No, the mote in the other person's eye and the beam in your own eye. You got a big old log in your eye, and you're trying to fish a little splinter out of someone else's eye. No, that's not how you do it. You fix yourself, and then you can fix other people. Okay, pay attention to yourself, fix that up before you can, start talking to other people. So it's not like we're going around trying to find all the problems, but when there's some sin and there's some obvious sin that needs to be dealt with, the right person needs to do it. Because we don't want God to come and have to do it. So he says, you go out, you do something about this. God cannot tolerate sin. He hates sin because it's so anti who he is. So he says, get rid of this. Remove it from your church, the false teaching and whatever compromise. Get rid of all that. Then he gives a promise. He likes to finish with a promise. Some good stuff here. A reward for the courageous. He ends with the good stuff. Look at verse 17. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. You got an ear? Can you hear? Just listen up. Listen to what I have to say. To him who overcomes, I will give some of the hidden manna to eat. And I will give him a white stone, and on the stone a new name written, which no one knows except him who receives it. That's another common thread through all these 7 churches to whom John is writing and giving this message of Jesus. He says, to the ones who overcome, I will do something. And so it's interesting to try to figure out what is God going to do to those who overcome. By the way, if you remember, we discussed this before. Who are those who overcome? The ones who overcome are the true believers. Okay, it's not like, well, if I toe the line, I do enough good things, now I'm an overcomer and I get this. No, we've seen the ones who overcome, it's using that phrase here, the ones who overcome, the way John uses that phrase is the true believers, because the true believers will overcome, okay? So the true believers in these churches, what happens? What reward does God give them? Because the true believers will obey, okay? And that's what I'm getting at here. When Jesus comes to Pergamos and he says, you guys, I know you're faithful, but you need to deal with the sin, his true followers will say, yes, sir, and they'll go do it. So they're the overcomers, okay? And so what is God going to do for them when they do this? He says, I will give some of the hidden manna to eat. So we ask the question, what does that mean? What hidden manna? I mean, it'd be kind of nice to have some of that hidden manna. What is it? By the way, that's what manna means. What is it? Remember, God fed the Israelites. They were, we're hungry. He says, okay, get up in the morning, there'll be this white stuff on the ground. And you can eat it. If I find white stuff on the ground, I'm not going to eat it. But it was okay for them, right? And so they eat this, and they look and they said, what is it? I don't know, what is it? And so they called it, what is it? Hebrew means it's manna. That means, so how many of you ate, what is it this afternoon? Your wife gave it to you, what is it? I don't know, just eat it. Okay, you ate manna. That's what it means. So what does it mean here? He says in Pergamos, to the ones who overcome, I will give the hidden manna. I'm going to tell you my answer. My answer is, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe the people in Pergamos know, but some people, people speculate, and the one speculation I've heard is that Jesus is referring to himself, because in other places in the Gospels, he calls himself the bread of life. So maybe he's referring to, hey, the overcomers, I will give you myself. I don't know if we can say yes or no on that, but the point is, it doesn't matter so much to us what the hidden manna is. What he's trying to get across is, I will honor the overcomers. I will reward the overcomers. And in this case, in Pergamos, it's the people who get rid of sin in their own life and help to remove sin from the church. Those are the overcomers in Pergamos. To them, I will give the hidden manna. And then he says something else. That's why the book of Revelation is so fun, because you read stuff and you say, what are we talking about here? And so you read all the commentaries, you read 5 commentaries, and there's 6 different interpretations of what things mean. So sometimes you have to say, I'm not real sure. But you can still get to the main idea, okay? And if we don't understand all these things, we get to the main idea, which is get rid of sin in your life and get rid of sin in your church. But he also says here, okay, him who overcomes, I'll give some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone. And on the stone, a new name written, which no one knows except him who receives it. So now we have something else. Not quite sure what the hidden manna is. Maybe some of you have a better opinion. Maybe some of you know what it is. I'm not so sure that I know. But what about the white stone? What is the white stone? And there's all kinds of ideas out there, too, about what the white stone means. And I've heard one idea about what it means is that people, when they entered the theater at Pergamos, so they'd be given a white stone indicating their ticket to enter in. So maybe he's saying here, the overcomers, those true believers, I will give the ticket to enter into heaven. That's one possibility some people have. Another possibility some people think is that when you go to court, you went to court in Pergamos, and you were innocent, they would give you a white stone, which is a symbol of not being guilty. That's one idea. Another idea, and I find this one intriguing, is go back to the Asclepian. Remember that healing center, that hospital kind of thing, and people would go and they spend all night, and they would tell their dreams to the priest doctor, and then the priest doctor would do things and try to help them get better and all that. One of the things they would do there, after they came out and they were healed, is they would give them a white stone. It was called a votive stone, V-O-T-I-V-E, a votive stone. And this person, when they were healed, they would write on this stone what remedy they were healed, or what disease they were healed from, and what their remedy was, and all that. So they would write it all on. I was healed of such and such an issue, and so maybe when God says, I'll give them a white stone, maybe it's indication of I will give healing to them. The fact is, we don't really know, but the people in Pergamos would have understood that God is saying, you take care of this issue, and my true believers who obey me, I'm going to reward them. What is the white stone? What is the hidden manna? We can debate that. That doesn't matter so much as that God rewards the people who obey. And in this case, obedience is remove sin. So what do the overcomers get? The overcomers will receive a reward because they refuse to compromise. That's what we have to understand. Now, when we use the word compromise, immediately we would think of light issues. Maybe some of you remember the days where if you said you're compromising, it means you have instruments like these on the stage. That's compromise. This isn't the kind of stuff we're talking about in Pergamos, okay? We're talking about false teaching. We're talking about sin that is directly stated in the Bible. Real stuff, not this frivolous stuff that we like to get in fights with other Christians about, but there was some serious stuff going on here in Pergamos. And Jesus says, you need to get rid of that. And if you do, I will give a reward. I'll give you the hidden manna, and you people at Pergamos know what I'm talking about. I'm going to give you a white stone, a new name. I'm going to give you that, and you know what I'm talking about. For us, we say, what is he talking about? But the point is, we just need to obey. We need to do like he told in Pergamos. We need to make sure that we are removing sin from our life. So here's the final statement. We must be bold enough to refuse to compromise with sin in our own lives and in the life of our church. So this morning, the focus was, don't allow sin in your life. Remember, did any of you grab the little papers? I think I might have one here. Any of you grab your little donkey paper? What's your price? What's your price? I think there's still some out there. Put that somewhere and you say, okay, what is my price? For what price will I sin? For what price will I sin? My pleasure, money, for acceptance from people, what? For what price will I sin? We're talking about ourselves this morning, but tonight, as we look at Pergamos, for what price will I allow sin to take place around me in my church? You need to let some things go because, we all, everybody fails, everybody's sinning, right? But sometimes things are so egregious that we need to say, you know what? This absolutely cannot be allowed. Sometimes one of the issues they had there in Pergamos was false teaching things that are not biblical. And Jesus says, this has to come to an end. You cannot allow that in your church. And there was sin. There was things like that happening. Don't compromise. So I hope, again, tonight that you'll take one of these cards and put it up and remind yourself the doctrine of Balaam, compromising. Don't sell out. Let's bow our heads and close our eyes tonight. We're going to end here with a word of prayer in just a minute. But I just want you to think again today, if you were here for both of these messages, both this morning and tonight, and think about sin that you're allowing in your life. And that word sin is so generic, and we think sin, that's what other people do, right? But the little things in your own life that you have, the thoughts that are wrong, the attitudes you have that are wrong, the way you speak wrongly to other people, and think about other people, and all that. This is all sin. These are all things that God cannot tolerate. Maybe it's something that we might, name as one of the big sins. And you got it in your life, and it's secret, and you don't want anybody to know. This is the day to remove that. So just as you're sitting right where you are tonight, why don't you just tonight, right now, just tell God, God, I'm done with that in my life. No longer will I compromise on that. Whatever it is that's encouraging you to do that sin, say, you know what, I'm not going to sell out. I am not going to sell out and allow this sin in my life. You say, I don't want this in my life. I don't want this in my church. Father, tonight, I come before you, God, with all these people, and we ask that you would help us to be what we should be as a church, as East Lake Baptist Church. And God, I just ask that we would root out sin in our lives in places where we're compromising and doing things that are wrong just simply because there's a benefit in it for us. Let's remember that you have the sword, and you will come and remove the sin in a way that we prefer not to. God, I just ask that we would be a pure people. In Jesus' name, amen.